Why was Fernando Valenzuela's screwball so difficult to hit? Why did he have that crazy pitching motion that batters initially laughed at? And was he the first great Mexican-American baseball icon? We've got Fernandomania today because Rad History is tackling the legend of the recently departed Fernando Valenzuela. Welcome to another episode of Rad History, the 80s, 90s podcast, looking at the last 2 decades of the 20th century when things were still relatively normal and chill. I'm Brian McCullough. On October 22nd, one of the sporting icons of the 1980s died. Fernando Valenzuela was aged 68. I had planned on doing an episode on Fernando and Fernandomania eventually, but in honor of the great man's passing, I decided to do it now. Fernando Valenzuela and Fernandomania was born on November 1st, 1960 in Echohuaquila, a small village in Sonora, Mexico. He grew up in extreme poverty as one of 12 children. His father was a farm laborer, and young Fernando helped work the fields from an early age. He also began playing baseball early, often using makeshift equipment due to his family's limited resources. There are various stories that he learned to pitch either by throwing rocks at fence posts, in some accounts it was oranges, and he developed his distinctive pitching motion then, which included his famous looking up to the sky delivery. This is what would become his trademark eventually. His baseball journey began in earnest when he started playing in Mexican baseball leagues as a teenager. In 1977, at just 16 years of age, he began his professional career with the Guanajuato Tuzos of the Mexican Central League. He quickly moved up to the Mexican Pacific League, playing for the Mayos de Navojoa. In 1977, a scout from the Los Angeles Dodgers, Mike Brito, was in Mexico scouting a different prospect when fate intervened. While watching a game, he noticed that batters were laughing at a young pitcher. Specifically, they were laughing at that young pitcher's unique delivery, again, where he looked skyward during his windup, as if summoning the gods to shape his delivery. But what really caught Brito's attention was the fact that despite their laughter, these same batters couldn't hit the pitcher's offerings. The young pitcher was Fernando Valenzuela. Brito also noticed Valenzuela's exceptional control, his unusual maturity on the mound, and a natural movement on his pitches that was rare for someone so young. What made the discovery even more remarkable was that Valenzuela didn't fit the typical profile of a pitching prospect. He had that unusual delivery, seemingly had received little formal coaching, and was stocky. Valenzuela would have a reputation for being on the weightier side his entire career. Despite some initial skepticism from the Dodgers organization about Valenzuela's unconventional style, Brito strongly advocated for signing him. The acquisition of Valenzuela wasn't straightforward. To secure Valenzuela's rights, the Dodgers had to negotiate a package deal that included several other players. The total cost was around $120,000, with only a small portion of that actually allocated to Fernando. That would end up making it one of the greatest bargains in baseball history, though. Brito's role didn't end with the signing. He remained involved throughout Valenzuela's early career, helping with his cultural transition to the United States, providing translation when needed, and serving as sort of a mentor and father figure. After being signed by the Dodgers, Valenzuela started in their minor league system, but only briefly. He played for the Class A California League's Lodi Dodgers before being promoted to Double-A San Antonio. His rapid development led to a late season call-up to the major leagues in September of 1980. During this first taste of the big leagues, Valenzuela pitched 17 2/3 scoreless innings in relief, giving fans a glimpse of what was to come. But it was on opening day of the following season, 1981, when the legend of Fernando Valenzuela really began. When the intended starting pitcher for that first game pulled a calf muscle, manager Tommy Lasorda had to choose between several veterans and the rookie Valenzuela. Fernando had had a decent spring training, but still the media and various veteran teammates were surprised when Lasorda gave the 20-year-old the ball to start his first major league game again on the first game of the season. He responded with a 2-0 victory over the Houston Astros. In his first 8 starts of 1981, Valenzuela threw 5 shutouts and allowed only 2 earned runs in 72 innings pitched, and tallied an 8-0 record with an ERA of 0.5. So began the legend, and so began the phenomenon known as Fernandomania. During Valenzuela's warm-ups, the Dodgers began playing ABBA's hit song Fernando on the stadium loudspeakers, and Latin, especially Mexican-American fans, began turning out in large numbers. This was something new. Despite the large Mexican diaspora in Los Angeles, the Dodgers, and really baseball in general, had not made much of an effort to reach out to and appeal to Latin fans. But after intense media coverage of these first 8 games, Latin fans began to throng to watch El Toro, as he was called, the Bull. Home attendance at Dodger games increased by approximately 9,000 fans per Valenzuela start. Even away games saw increases of 8,000 to 12,000 fans when Valenzuela pitched, as he drew Latin fans in other cities as well. Dodger season ticket sales jumped significantly for the 1981 and 82 seasons, and his starts regularly sold out. What became called Fernandomania prompted a concerted effort on the part of the Dodgers to reach out to this new demographic of fans. Mexican flags became a common sight at Dodger Stadium. Spanish-language signage increased throughout the ballpark. Mariachi music was added to the stadium's musical rotation. New Hispanic food options were even added in addition to the hot dogs and pretzels, and fan clubs spread throughout Southern California. His charisma was unbelievable, Dodgers Spanish-language announcer Jaime Jarrín said. The fact that he came here to the major leagues after spending just a few weeks in San Antonio at AA, and from the beginning he was just amazing, and the people fell in love with him. Valenzuela finished the 1981 season with a 13-7 record, an ERA of 2.48, 11 complete games, and 8 shutouts. He led the National League with 192 1/3 innings pitched, and topped the majors with 180 strikeouts, becoming the first player to win the Rookie of the Year and the Cy Young Award. He's still the only one to do it in the same season. Valenzuela finished 3rd in Cy Young voting in 1982, 5th in 1985, and 2nd in 1986. And that first season was also the start of 6 straight All-Star appearances. From 1983 to 1987, Valenzuela averaged 262 innings pitched and 13 complete games. He had a streak of 255 consecutive starts, which ended in August of 1988. He registered 20 complete games in 1986 when he won a league-high 21 games and had a 3.14 ERA. He had 96 complete games in his first 7 seasons. Valenzuela's pitching success was built around his signature pitch, the screwball. The screwball moves in the opposite direction of a typical curveball. He learned this pitch from Bobby Castillo, his teammate with the Dodgers. Castillo had learned the screwball while he was in prison, where he was serving time for assault. During recreation time, another inmate taught him the grip and motion, and Castillo then passed this knowledge on to Valenzuela, who would perfect it and make it one of baseball's most devastating pitches. And then there was the unique windup, as we've mentioned before, quoting MLB.com. As he began his windup, he would lift his arms over his head, and as he began to bring them down to meet his right leg, he'd look to the sky, as the legendary Vin Scully would say. His eyes would roll up until only the whites would show, and he would pause at, the apex of the windup, with his leg raised before moving to the release. Somehow, this gave him great power from his lower body and a consistency in terms of where he released the ball, especially with the screwball. The origin of his famous skyward-looking windup is both practical and accidental. As a young player in Mexico, Valenzuela had a habit of tipping his pitches, letting batters know what he was about to throw by looking at where he planned to throw. His manager suggested that instead, he look straight up during his delivery to prevent this. The distinctive motion became his trademark, though he claimed he was actually looking at a point just above the stadium rather than at heaven, as many believed. Valenzuela's screwball broke away hard, especially from right-handed hitters with a late-breaking action. And though he could throw a 92-mile-per-hour fastball, he would often vary the screwball speed wildly between 75 and 82 miles per hour. Few pitchers throw a screwball because it requires rotating the arm inward toward the body, which can be painful. Valenzuela was one of the few pitchers of his era who threw a screwball regularly. The screwball is so rarely mastered that Tyler Kepner, a former national baseball writer for the New York Times, described it as the Sasquatch of baseball. Fernando would often establish the fastball early in games and then mix in the screwball as a strikeout pitch, using it more frequently as the game progressed, and often throwing it in unexpected counts or throwing it for strikes as a chase pitch. He even had the ability to start it at different spots depending on the tendency of a given batter. Even if the hitter made contact, his screwball could induce weak contact, which often led to outs. One of Valenzuela's most legendary games came in that first season. In Game 3 of the 1981 World Series, the New York Yankees already had a commanding 2-0 lead, 2-0 lead over the Dodgers, and Dodger manager Tommy Lasorda's crew was facing the very real possibility of a third World Series loss in just 5 years. In the end, though, the Dodgers won Game 3 5-4, largely due to the gritty performance of their rookie left-hander. Valenzuela didn't have his best game. He gave up 9 hits and 7 walks in a 146-pitch complete game, but it was an emotional turning point. His ability to control the game and eke out a win gave the Dodgers the sense that they were turning the tide in terms of momentum. The Dodgers would win their next 3 games, turning the series around completely and eventually winning the World Series in 1981. Though Valenzuela learned English fairly quickly, he continued to use an interpreter for interviews throughout his career. He later revealed this was partly strategic. It gave him time to think about his responses and avoided potential misunderstandings. His most used interpreter, Jaime Jarrín, became a close friend. That's the same Jarrín who is the Hall of Fame Spanish-language broadcaster. Valenzuela's favorite catcher, Mike Scioscia, spoke some Spanish, and he attributed Dodgers manager Tommy Lasorda's ability to fully speak Spanish to Valenzuela as being useful in settling him into the sport early. Quote, "He gave him all instructions in Spanish," said Scioscia. Lasorda had learned Spanish while in the Caribbean Winter Leagues. For his part, Lasorda credited Scioscia with steadying Valenzuela. Quote, "He learned Spanish just so he could communicate with Fernando," said Lasorda. Early in his career, Valenzuela was so dedicated to improving that he would sometimes sleep at Dodger Stadium between starts. He would use the training facilities late into the night and early in the morning, leading some security guards to believe the stadium was haunted until they discovered it was just Fernando working out. Interestingly, Valenzuela was one of the best hitting pitchers of his era, winning 2 Silver Slugger Awards. He had 10 home runs in his career and was often used as a pinch hitter. He was so good as a hitter that during batting practice, he would often hit from both sides of the plate and regularly hit home runs, amazing his teammates. Once during a rain delay, he entertained fans by hitting practice pitches deep into the stands while holding an umbrella. Prior to the 1983 season, Valenzuela became the first player to be awarded a $1 million salary in arbitration. In 1986, Valenzuela finished 21-11 with a 3.14 ERA and led the league in wins, complete games, and innings pitched. As mentioned, he almost won a second Cy Young Award that year, but lost a narrow vote to the Astros' Mike Scott. During the 1987 season, Valenzuela was pitching when an earthquake struck Los Angeles. While many players and fans panicked, Fernando remained on the mound, later saying he thought it was just the crowd being especially enthusiastic. When asked about it later, he quipped, "I thought I was just throwing really hard that day." Fernando was always, shall we say, not gifted with the physique of a typical baseball player. Manager Lasorda was constantly concerned about Valenzuela's weight and eating habits. He once tried to put Fernando on a diet, but Valenzuela responded by pitching poorly in his next start. When Lasorda asked what was wrong, Fernando said, "No tortillas, no victories." The diet was quickly abandoned. Ironic, considering Lasorda would famously go on to become a pitchman for Slim Fast. On June 29, 1990, Valenzuela threw a no-hitter against the St. Louis Cardinals. What makes this especially remarkable is that it occurred on the same night that Dave Stewart threw a no-hitter in Toronto, the only time in Major League Baseball history that two no-hitters were thrown on the same day in different parks. Speaking of his post-Dodgers career, after pitching somewhat erratically in spring training in 1991, Valenzuela was released by the Dodgers. He had been dogged by nagging shoulder issues for years. Being cut late in spring training, when most rosters were already fixed, made it difficult for Valenzuela to find a new team, something he did not appreciate. He did end up signing for the Detroit Tigers, Baltimore Orioles, Philadelphia Phillies, and San Diego Padres, with whom he enjoyed his last successful season in 1996, going 13-8 with a 3.62 ERA. He ended his career with the St. Louis Cardinals in 1997, and he ended his career with a record of 173 wins, 153 losses, and a 3.54 ERA. Though he never made it to the Baseball Hall of Fame, he did join Jim Gilliam as the only two non-Hall of Fame Dodgers to have their jersey numbers retired. Valenzuela actually pitched a couple of seasons in Mexico in semi-pro leagues in his 40s. And in 2003, despite hard feelings, as mentioned, about the way the team had released him, he did return to the Dodgers as a broadcaster and remained so until shortly before his death. The legacy of Fernando Valenzuela is obviously the expanded fandom and demographic profile of the fans that he brought to the Dodgers and to Major League Baseball more generally. He wasn't the first Mexican-American baseball player, but he was the first Mexican-American megastar and arguably one of the biggest crossover Mexican-American icons in any field in the 1980s. So pour one out for a real one. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Rad History and 80s 90s podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe and check out our other videos. If you're listening on a podcast app, be sure to subscribe as well. More 80s and 90s history next week. Until then, yo homes, smell you later.